Title: The Oracle and the Bride. Year: 300 million. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the distant echoes of a world still young, before the rise of kingdoms with a burden of maps, a sanctuary of silence stretched across the tide flats of the boundless coast. Here stood the Oracle of Shifting Sands, barefoot and veiled, her voice carried only in ripples of dreams. She did not speak often, for words were tools too crude for truths that swam like stars behind closed eyes. From distant lands came those burdened with doubt, drawn to her prisons, not by hope, but necessity. Among them walked a girl cloaked in grief and tethered to vengeance, the bone-break bride. She had once worn joy as a crown, now exchanged for silence sharpened into resolve. Her arms bore ceremonial wrappings inked with the bones of those she'd lost, every mark of vow unfulfilled. They met beneath the bloodless moon, a waning luminary set to stir destiny, and spoke, not with voices, but with stillness. The bride kneeled, and the sands trembled. The oracle wept a single tear, and from it bloomed a vision. A future shattered by flame, where compassion was outlawed and courage chained. "You came for power," the oracle whispered finally. "But I offer clarity." The bride scoffed, her breath dry with disappointment. "Clarity does not avenge the dead." "No," the oracle said, placing a finger upon the bride's chest, "but it prevents more from joining them." That night the bride did not sleep. She watched the tide retreat endlessly, as though the ocean itself struggled with letting go. By morning, she left the sanctuary carrying no answers, only the sacred breath gifted to those ready to choose differently. Chapter 2. The journey through the Whispering Pass was meant to harden the soul. Its winds told lies to unsteady hearts, visions of false enemies, twisted truths, reflections that begged surrender. The bone-break bride trudged forward, every step sinking her deeper into confrontation not with beasts, but herself. Visions came unbidden, her father shamed by defeat, her sister silent in death's embrace. The oracle's words echoed louder than the storm. One sacred breath. She clenched her jaw. "I do not need breath. I need fury." Yet her rage faltered as the landscape changed. She found a village turned upside down, not by fire, but famine. Children rationed silent like bread. Leaders barked from towers built of abandoned truths. And in their eyes she saw what she had become, a guardian of vengeance, not life. She met a boy, no older than her brother had been, drawing with coal on stone. His drawing showed the bride herself, not as warrior, but as protector. No weapon, just hands extended. "I saw you in my dream," the boy said. "Was I killing anyone?" The boy shook his head. "You saved the sky." That night, the bride lit a fire that did not warm herself by it. She fed it her final vengeance vow, written in ash and sealed in blood. As the flames rose, she wept not for what was lost, but for what could still be salvaged. She breathed one sacred breath, and let it change her. Chapter 3. The city of Meridian, once a beacon of enlightenment, now throbbed beneath the boot of tyrants who had traded dreams for order. Its towers stretched like accusations into the sky. The bride, cloaked now in sand, stained robes of the oracle's hue, passed unnoticed among the hollow-eyed citizens. She no longer sought the highest tower to cut down its lord. She sought the underground, those whispered into corners and erased from scrolls. The compassionists, the old dreamers, the rebels of soul. With her came not a call to war, but a breath passed from one to the next. Stories whispered beneath the noise, weaving new myth from ruined cloth. The oracle's vision had seeded a network, not of soldiers, but of listeners. And the bride, once a blade, was now a mirror. When at last the bone-break bride stood before the tyrant, unarmed, unflinching, the city did not erupt in chaos. It stilled, for they had seen her in dreams. She did not raise her fist. She raised her hand. "I am not your executioner," she said. "I am your echo, and we both know what you've silenced." The tyrant, undone not by blade but by recognition, stepped down. A single sacred breath carried through the chamber, then another, and another, until Meridian remembered how to breathe again. And the bride, no longer broken, no longer a bride, walked out into a dawn that waited to be written. Story name: The Last Dawn of Summer. Story year: 299,358,974. Story era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. It began in silence. The town of Byronmore hadn't seen sunlight in weeks, not because of storms, but because the air itself seemed to tremble with a darkness that couldn't be measured. In the crumbling stone library where time had no meaning, the phantom with the thread emerged. They had no name, only purpose, a flicker of resistance in a world that had forgotten its own voice. They weren't born in the traditional sense. They had been stitched into existence from memory and mourning, summoned by the ancient pact made during the first days of division. As dusk pulled long shadows across the land, The phantom encountered the last thornman of summer, once a girl named Elswan. She had long since abandoned her former self, her humanity traded for insight none should carry. Together they walked among those who had forgotten how to speak to one another, whispering unity into broken minds. But something followed, and it had learned to listen. Chapter 2. Firemore remembered. The town wasn't always this way. Long ago, before the rot beneath the cobbled streets seeped up into its breath, people lived and died without fear of what slumbered under the soil. But history left wounds, and wounds, when ignored, become mouths. Phantom knew the scent of awakening. Thread by thread, they sewed together old truths in the minds of the townspeople. A merchant's lost courage, a priest's buried remorse, a child's still laughter. Each stitch was a reclamation, each memory a blade, but the cost grew. Elsewhere began to change. Her hands shimmered with the phantom light, not unlike the veil that cloaked the phantom. She too was becoming a bridge. A bridge always bears weight until it breaks. Chapter 3. The end does not arrive with fanfare. It seeps. As the final moon waned above Firemore, the townspeople gathered at the root of the old tree, where truth and madness danced in equal measure. The phantom and Elson stood before them, guardians not of fate, but of choice. One by one, villagers whispered forgotten names and forgiven wounds into the soil. The air changed. The silence lifted. But redemption is not without price. The last thorn of summer had one final stitch to place herself. Elsewhere stepped into the roots, anchoring the healing as the tree wept petals of starlight. She did not scream. She did not resist. Phantom watched, and for the first time, felt the weight of their form. In Firemore, collaboration had taken root. The soul of the town stitched back into being, and the phantom vanished, thread unwinding into dawn. Kael, the keeper of forgotten rites. Year 298,717,948. Era Primordial Pulse. Author Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the twilight of the decaying epoch, when stars dimmed with grief and rivers forgot their names, the keeper of forgotten rites stirred within the temple of Bonai. Every generation, one child was chosen not to lead, not to fight, but to remember. She bore no blade, only scrolls stitched from memory again, and her voice was a thread spun through time. But memory had grown dangerous. The elders had begun to censor the rites, claiming some truths were too heavy for young minds. Let them grow strong before they carry such weight, they said. The strength without truth was a hollow shell, and the keeper knew the void it bred. Chapter 2. The threadless spinner awaited her beneath the hollow roots of the yawning tree, where the ancients had once woven the fabric of destiny. Now the loom stood silent, its threads cut by centuries of neglect and fear. I cannot spin without a thread, the spinner lamented. Hands raw from phantom work, you do not need thread. The keeper replied, you need truth. She unfurled the forbidden scrolls, songs forgotten, names erased, deeds whitewashed by fragile pride, all laid bare. The spinner wept as the tree began to hum. The wind stirred the dust into symbols, signs of stories once passed from mouth to soul in firelight. The spinner's tears traced ancient glyphs in the soil, and in her weeping, the silence began to sing again. We spun not from thread, the keeper said, but from the will to carry what others dropped. The keeper placed the scrolls in the roots, where the tree drank their ink like water. The yawning tree grew blossoms of memory. Chapter 3. When the children came, drawn by dreams of glowing roots and weeping winds, the keeper greeted them with open arms. They were not soldiers. They were not priests. They were witnesses. She taught them the rites not as rules, but as riverbeds of meaning. They learned the weight of each name, each sorrow, each joy. They learned to spin from the silence left behind. And as they spun, the world began to change. For what had been buried and not died, and what had been feared, when taught with love, became the bridge to a future that remembered how to begin again. One child, the youngest, took the blossom fallen from the yawning tree and planted it beyond the temple walls. In the decades to come, it grove bore the names of every child who learned the rites, each petal etched in the language of memory. And when tyrants came to burn the grove, the flowers would not catch. They had bloomed from truth, and truth does not burn. Story name, Male Walkers of the Moonlit Expanse. Story year, 298,717,948.6. Story era, Primordial Pulse. Author Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The moon hung low in the sky, cloaked in mist that shimmered like a living veil. Beneath it, in the vast valley of Noctis Reach, the scattered remnants of the ancients walked with burdened hearts. Among them, the child named Kael stirred with questions that clawed through the stillness of his life, questions whispered to him in the dead of night by a voice only he could hear. This voice, known only as the Shadow Whisperer, urged Kael to wander farther each night, to leave the protective radius of the campfires, to trace the runes carved into the stones left behind by the celestial exodus. He obeyed without knowing why, not out of trust, but because something deep in him resonated with the soft timbre of that voice, a longing to remember what was lost before his time. Each step took him deeper into the moon's shadow, a cursed sector where late bent, wrong, and echoes carried secrets. There, he met the voice of the moon's shadow, not a person, but an apparition cloaked in violet threads of starlight, shaped like the silhouette of a woman forever walking away. She spoke not in words, but memories. "You are not weak," she said, the thought ringing like a bell inside his bones. "You are simply open." Cale wept without knowing why. Chapter 2. As dawn approached, Cale returned to the camp with markings on his skin that pulsed with a pale glow. The elders stared, horrified and reverent. They'd seen those marks before in the war that birthed the current era, and those touched by the last veil tear. A tribunal was called. Voices clashed over whether Cale was cursed or chosen. In the end, it was his sister Lara who stood for him. "You fear what we do not understand, but fear is not a guide, it is a prison." Despite her plea, Cale was exiled for a cycle of moons, sent to dwell in the ruins beyond the broken crescent ridge. There in solitude, the voice returned, not whispering now, but speaking with clarity. "You carry the map inside you." Cale began to draw. Symbols, spirals, pathways unseen. He felt watched, yet never alone. Chapter 3. The night of the blood eclipse arrived. From every distant reach, those bearing the moon's mark gathered at the edge of the ridge, drawn by something older than prophecy. Cale stood among them, no longer afraid. When the moon bled red, the earth responded. Stones shifted. Veins of light traced the land. The voice returned one final time. "Now you walk not alone." A portal opened, shaped like a weeping eye, glowing with memory. Cale stepped through. He emerged into a dreamscape stitched from lost timelines and future echoes. Here, every emotion was a thread, every truth a needle. Cale sewed his story into the fabric of the cosmos. In doing so, he rewrote not just his destiny, but the fate of every soul willing to walk despite the fog. The Veil Walkers had returned. Title: The Laughing Ash. Year: 298,076,922.9. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac series, 2025. Chapter 1. In the twilight of the primordial pulse, where stars whispered before they burned and oceans dreamed of their names, there stood a cliff of blackened glass. The Laughing Ash. They called it not for mirth, but for memory. Wind passing through its fractured stone emitted a sound too human, too pained to be natural. Here, the mirror mother waited. Once she had been something else, a guardian, a warrior, a mother. Now she was more reflection than flesh, her body laced with translucent vines that showed not blood, but memory. Her people had fallen in silence when the storm choir came, and with the passing, she had exiled herself to the cliff that laughed. One night, the winds changed. From the valley below, a stranger ascended, clad in bone, wrapped cloth, and bearing a talisman carved in the shape of a closed eye. The stranger offered no name, only a story. That war boiled in the east, and children had begun to dream of fire again. The mirror mother said nothing, but she turned to the cliff and listened. The ash laughed louder. "Then it's true," she murmured. "The world has not learned." Thus began her descent, not just from the cliff, but from her grief. Chapter 2. They passed through the veil of fractured names, a canyon carved not by water, but by forgetting. Yet voices echoed out of order, memories misplaced themselves, and even the ground seemed uncertain of its purpose. The mirror mother spoke rarely, but when she did, it was to correct the error. "They've rewritten the conflict," she told the stranger. "Changed the reason, blamed the tools." The stranger nodded. "It's easier to hate the fire than the one who struck the flint." At the canyon's mouth, a caravan awaited refugees from the southern rise. Their leader, a boy no older than 13, held authority, not with force, but with food. He rationed kindness like currency, and his people survived because they believed. One night, the mirror mother watched the boy argue with a soldier over the fate of a sick infant. The soldier demanded silence and obedience. The boy demanded compassion. The mirror mother stepped between them. "Conflict does not create cruelty," she said, "but it reveals the cracks where cruelty waits." The soldier left in shame. The baby lived, and so the mirror mother became a myth again, not a ghost of war, but its reckoner. Chapter 3. The city of Dal Hareth had survived 10 collapses. Now it was eating itself. The towers leaned in conspiracy, and its leaders traded water for weapons. When the mirror mother arrived, she did not bring an army. She brought mirrors. She hung them in the square outside courtrooms, on the backs of guards, small ones, fragile, and yet each a challenge. They reflected not just faces, but motives. People saw themselves frown when they lied, blink when they stole, shiver when they ordered cruelty. Some shattered the mirrors in rage, but some began to see. The Mirror Mother's final act was in the chamber of the Council of Thorns. She stood alone, her cloak of ash dripping memory onto the marble. "I do not come to accuse," she said, "only to reflect." They laughed, until she raised her hand, and every mirror in dull horror cracked not from pressure, but from truth shared too widely to contain. The council fell as she left the city. Children followed her, not to war, to learn, to remember, and the Laugh-in-Ash laughed less, for the world had begun at last to listen. Title: The Silence That Burned the Map. Year: 297,435,897.4. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. At the edge of the known world, where cartographers dared not ink the stars in kindness or teeth, a village crouched in the cradle of silence. No bells, no cries, no wind to carry the names of the dead, only stillness. This was where the astral cartographer made her home. She had once drawn constellations for kings, wrote entire destinies into parchment, but that was before the silence fell, before she refused to chart the sky that watched an empire burn and said nothing. Now her maps burned themselves before completion. One morning, beneath a sun that seemed unsure of its own rising, a visitor arrived, cloaked in black felt and contradictions. He bore a compass of bone and a smile that didn't match his eyes. "I was told that crooked kindness lived here," he said. The cartographer eyed him without greeting. "Then you were told wrong. She died the moment the last child vanished from the southern schools." A visitor dropped a scroll at her feet. It unfurled itself, revealing not routes or stars, but moments of hesitation. Every choice not taken, every truth not spoken. "Each step toward destiny is lit by the fire of all your former hesitations," he said. She looked away, but the scroll whispered, "At night, the stars changed their position, and the silence cracked." Chapter 2. The Crooked Kindness, as she once was, had been a myth, a rebel disguised as a bureaucrat, weaving mercy into mendics and sabotage into policy. Her kindness had always been crooked, twisted through systems, hidden in plain text, burning only in footnotes. And now she walked again. She and the cartographer journeyed to the bastion of breathless judgments, a ruin where laws once passed in whispers and justice hid behind curtains. There only echoes ruled, and they were loud. Beneath the tribunal arch they found etchings of names too long to speak. These were the names of those sacrificed for the safety of those in power. The cartographer knelt and poured ink from her veins. Her own hesitations now marked the stone. The crooked kindness held aloft the compass of bone. It spun without direction, pointing not north but inward. From the depths of the bastion rose a chorus of unseen voices. "Why did you not speak when we needed thunder?" The cartographer lowered her gaze. "As I feared, I was only a raindrop." The crooked kindness touched her shoulder, but raindrops flood the desert. A doorway opened, not one built of stone or spell, but of choice. They stepped through. Chapter 3. On the other side lay the hall of unlived days, a realm where the world kept its receipts. Every silence, every pause, every closed eye was archived here. The astral cartographer walked its halls and saw herself hundreds of versions, some proud, some weeping, some turned entirely to stone. She paused before one who bore a crown made of apologies. "I could have been her," she whispered. "You still can," said the crooked kindness. But to become her there was a cost. They stood before the mirror of embers, an artifact not made of glass, but of all the fire not lit. To pass through it, one had to shout the truth they had buried deepest. The cartographer hesitated, and then she screamed. "I drew maps to guide monsters, and called it safety." The mirror shattered. Flames rushed past them, not to burn, but to light the way. All across the world, people stirred. Silences lifted. Truth rose from inkless pages. In the capital, a magistrate collapsed as the ghost of the trial whispered her verdict. In a village far away, a teacher wept as his missing students called his name in wind. The astral cartographer stepped from the hall of unlived days, her cloak now lined with stars reclaimed. The crooked kindness smiled. "You see," she said, "even the crooked can point true." And behind them, silence became song. Title: The Flame Dancer. Year: 297,435,897.2. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the cradle of the world's first river, long before iron met flame, there lived a people who knew the language of warmth. They built no walls, etched no borders. Their cities were gatherings more than conquests, and their stories traveled on breath rather than scroll. Among them danced the Flame Dancer. She was not born of their village, but fell from the sky in a shower of starred glass. The elders found her amid smoldering reeds, eyes bright as fire, yet body cold as morning. She did not speak for weeks, but when she moved, the wind followed. They taught her the ways of the hearth law, that all who come hungry are fed, all who come wounded are tended, and no truth should be asked until comfort is offered. In this, the flame dancer flourished. Her movements became ritual. Her offerings smoke as light transformed strangers into kin. There were whispers from the high steps. Riders painted in soot spoke of famine. A fire stolen rather than shared. They approached not with open hands, but with spears. The elders debated. The flame dancer listened, and that night she danced alone in the village circle, her shadow stretching like prophecy across the stone. Not in joy. In mourning. Chapter 2. When the riders came, the village met them with feasts. It was not cowardice, it was law. The flame dancer prepared the central fire herself. She offered bread soaked in honey root, waters perfumed with thistle smoke. The riders, accustomed to plunder, paused in confusion. Their leader, a gaunt man crowned with wolf teeth, approached with suspicion. "You feed your enemies?" "We feed the hungry," the flame dancer replied. "But generosity is a mirror, and in it the riders saw their own hunger, not just of stomach, but of meaning. Over nights of shared flame, weapons found the earth. The wolf-crowned leader confessed the truth. They had not come to conquer, but to collapse. Their lands were dying, and with them, their sense of self. The spirit of war stirred. It lingered in the spaces between offerings, in every gaze not met, not yet gone. Then came the theft. A young rider, desperate, stole a sacred jar of ember dust. The villagers found him. The law said, "No harm before healing," but the flame in their hearts flickered with doubt. The flame dancer stood between them. "What we give," she said, "we give without chain. Let him return it not in shame, but in story." The jar was restored. The boy remade. Chapter 3. The alliance became a migration. Villagers and riders moved as one across the cracked river beds, building fires in forgotten lands. With each act of generosity, the spirit of war shrank, reduced from storm to ember. But it was not gone. In a ruined amphitheater carved from saltstone, they found the remnants of an older people's statues bowed in eternal grief. The flame dancer read their ruins, not with eyes, but with motion. Her dance spoke of offerings rejected. Gifts mocked, compassion turned against itself. "This is what waits," she said, "when we give only to be thanked." They held council beneath starlight. It was agreed. No act of generosity would be weighed. No detract. Kindness would be given without witness. In time, the amphitheater filled with laughter instead of echoes. And the flame dancer, she moved on, to the next village that had forgotten the warmth of strangers, to the next fire that did not know how to welcome. She was never thanked, only followed. And wherever she danced, the spirit of war held its breath. Title: The Dream in the Teeth of Winter. Year: 296,794,871.5. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. Beneath the howling cliffs of the Pale North, there stood a fortress city named Tarsk, carved not for defense, but for silence. Its laws were etched in bone, its windows shuttered year-round. The only color permitted was gray. Year, difference was danger, and into this colorless world came a child named Levan, marked by the dream in the teeth of winter. He was born during the frost eclipse, when no stars could be seen and the snow bled from the sky. His mother claimed he cried in full sentences. His father disappeared the next day. Rumor said the boy was cursed. The courts decreed him ward of the state. At 7, Levan disappeared. He returned 10 years later in the dead of night, cloaked in vines and ash, standing atop the high wall of Tarsk. Those who saw him swore the wind bent away from him. They called him the vine-clad prophet. He came not to destroy, but to confess. "There's been a crime," he said, "and you've all been complicit." The silence of Tarsk cracked, if only slightly. The wind at the top had shifted. Chapter 2. Levan did not speak in proclamations. He whispered in alleyways, set with widows, left messages carved in the frost. He formed no armies. He unearthed memories. One by one, families remembered old neighbors, songs once sung, foods once spanned. He asked no one to rise, only to remember who they were before fear made them statues. But crime feeds on silence. The Grey Tribunal, keepers of the city's order, declared Levan an agitator. They blamed him for the rise in color scarves woven in secret, laughter in halls. They sent agents to erase his words. Still, he whispered, a young Inspector Lynn was tasked with his capture. She tracked him for weeks. When she cornered him near the Chapel of Dust, She expected spells. She found him lighting candles for the dead. "You've broken laws," she said. "No," Thelan replied. "I've broken the spell that made you think they protected you." She did not arrest him. Instead, she told him where to speak next. The vine-clad Prague. It was no longer alone. Chapter 3. The tribunal struck back. They outlawed mirrors. They burned the murals that had bloomed across the city's lowest walls. They poisoned wells of shared memory, accusing families of treason for remembering too rightly. Thelan answered not with weapons, but with witnesses. One night, he led a procession of the forgotten, those labeled mad, sick, broken. They entered the hall of grayness in silence and stood in rows before the tribunal. "I bring no crime," Thelan said, "only reflection." The prophet turned, revealing a mirror carved from winter's breath. It showed not faces, but shared sorrows. Every viewer saw another's pain as their own. The tribunal fractured. One judge wept. One fled. One remained and removed their robes. Hearts changed that night. Allah returned slowly, like spring thaw. The laws remained, but the fear behind them dissolved. And Thelan, he walked to the highest peak overlooking the city. The wind screamed, but he stood, arms open. "You can climb to the highest peak," he said, "but the wind is fiercest at the top." And then he laughed, not in victory, in peace. Title: The Calm Within the Spiral. Era. Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. When the world turned inward, and the stars wept for what they could no longer guide. The Temple of the Spiral was the last place where oaths held weight. It stood carved into the side of a sleeping mountain, coiled like the horn of a listening beast. Inside, silence was sacred, but not for its stillness, for its endurance. The spiral keeper traced his finger along the grooves of the inner sanctum. Each line etched into the stone was a decision made when easier choices screamed louder. He wore no crown, no mantle, only the burn of judgment upon his back seared in nameless patterns that told of choices others had fled. On this day he waited. The keeper of cosmic law was coming. She arrived as shadow and wind, her robe heavy with celestial dust, her eyes full of judgments unspoken. In her hand, a blade that could not cut flesh, only lies. "Chaos stirs in the eastern provinces," she said. "The governors want blood. The people want truth. The armies want nothing but orders." The spiral keeper bowed slightly. "And what do you want?" "I want you to choose." He turned back to the wall. "Stay calm when chaos screams is the mark of a warrior priest." She watched him for a moment, but silence is not the same as stillness. He placed his hand upon a particular groove. It burned cold. This was the line he would walk. Chapter 2. The council chambers of the eastern fold were a theater of veiled threats. Cloaks of silk hid daggers of intention. The governors gathered like storm clouds, faces lined not by age, but by evasion. The spiral keeper entered with the keeper of cosmic law at his side. Neither spoke until every eye turned. Then he unrolled the spiral mandate. A scroll of shifting text, one that could only be read in silence, with a conscience not yet broken. It told of a child who had spoken truth and a mother who vanished for it. It told of a farmer who withheld grain from the army and fed the sick instead. It told of law not as decree, but as balance, living and burning. The governors sneered. "This is myth," but their hands trembled. One among them rose. A young magistrate with a face too sincere for his seat. "My father ruled with steel," he said. He died with silence on his lips. "I would rather speak." He turned to the spiral keeper. "Fight us, not with law, with courage." The room turned. For a moment, no one breathed. And then agreement, not by vote, but by vulnerability. That night, the first spiral court convened in generations. Its charter, justice by remembrance. Chapter 3. The spiral keeper walked the outer rim of the temple as ash drifted from the highlands. Rumors of war had not ceased, but they had been named. Naming was power. Beside him, the keeper of cosmic law carried the blade still sheathed. She had not used it. She hadn't needed to. A boy met them on the trail, dirt on his cheeks, fire in his eyes. "They told me you choose who lives and who burns," he said. The spiral keeper knelt. "No, I remind those who already know." The boy nodded. "Then I will remember." He handed the spiral keeper a stone etched with the name of a sister taken by decree. The keeper placed it on the growing wall of names, each a vow, each a weight, as the sun crested the jagged rim of the mountain. The spiral keeper whispered the words that would shape the next decree. Courage is not a roar. It is a whisper that does not flee when fire rises. And the spiral turned once more, not by hand, but by will. Title: The Gray Soarer. Here. Era. Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called her the Great Sower, not because she brought death, but because she planted it. Beneath every cairn she built a seed. Beneath every name whispered to the earth a prayer. And in a land where memory faded faster than footprints in ash, she alone remembered the forbidden. Her valley was cursed. They said the sky had forgotten it, the stars refusing to mark its borders. It was a place for the broken to vanish, those who had tried and failed too many times. Ina was such a soul, once a scholar, once a mother, once a war. Widow titles she no longer answered to. Now she wandered until her feet bled, chasing rumors of a woman who could remember what the world had vowed to forget. She found the gray sower sowing silence. One stone at a time. I want to forget, Ina said. No, the gray sower replied. You want to not be haunted. Ina collapsed by the old woman's fire. The night sang of wind and regret. By morning she asked to stay, not to be healed, but to learn how to bury without losing. Chapter 2. The keeper of forbidden names arrived with no warning. He walked through the valley like a ghost remembering its body. His tongue knew words the sky had hidden. His presence curdled birdsong, and on his neck, tattooed in a spiral, were names no longer found in any archive. Ina feared him instantly. The Great Sower, however, invited him to sit. You've returned, she said, as if he'd never left. I found more, he replied, voice brittle, but I don't know what to do with them. They sat in silence. Later, Ina asked, why keep what no one wants? Because forgetting is a second death, he said, and I had died enough. Ina's dreams became layered. In one, she walked a labyrinth made of names. In another, she climbed a tower whose steps were failures she buried in herself. She awoke each time breathless, but determined. The grave sower gave her her first shovel. Buried only what you've carried long enough, she said, and Ina began to dig not graves, but memories. Chapter 3. The valley changed. Others came, broken ones, fractured ones, not to be saved, but to witness saving as something slow, earned, and uncertain. Ina grew strong not in body, but in story. She learned to speak without shame. Then the rings came. Old graves surfaced. Forgotten truths clawed upward. The seeds beneath the stones bloomed strange flowers that smelled like yesterday, and with them came voices. The keeper began to forget his own name. I've held too many, he said, trembling. I don't know who I am anymore. Ina held his hand. Then let me remember you. In a final act of defiance, they built a tower of names. Each brick of failure once buried, now marked and honored. When it was done, the valley was no longer cursed. The stars at last returned one by one, and Ina stood at the threshold. To cross the threshold, she whispered, you must stop knocking on the past. She stepped forward. Above her, the stars remembered what silence dared not speak. Title: The Vine-Clad Prophet. Year: 295,512,820.2. Europe. Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. There's a village where no one speaks of the gate. It looms at the edge of the woods, older than any tree. Its hinge is made of fused bone and blackened vine. Children are taught to bow when passing it. Elders place offerings always left untouched. No one remembers when the gate last opened, or if it ever has, they call it the gate that hungers. And when the vine-clad prophet arrived at Mud Street, eyes pulsing with the green that was unnatural, he walked straight to it. The village priestess tried to stop him. It's sacred, she warned. Then perhaps it's time we asked why, he said, voice echoing like distant thunder. The people gathered, trembling. The prophet did not touch the gate. He sat before it and began to speak not to the villagers, but to the gate itself. He spoke of fear as a prison, and tradition as the guard that smiles while locking the door. Chapter 2. Each night the prophet spoke. Each night more listened. He told of other villages once ruled by rituals, now breathing anew. He never mocked tradition, only asked, what is it guarding, and whom does it serve? The priestess countered with stories of the old ways, a time when the gates sealed in a great evil. But her words felt memorized, hollow. One boy, Orrin, dared to ask, if the gate is so dangerous, why does it hunger for nothing? The priestess slapped him. The next day, offerings were not made. No one died. No storm came. That night, the prophet placed his hand on the gate. It trembled, and something on the other side laughed not coolly, but softly, like someone waking from a long sleep. The villagers panicked. Torches were lit, but no one moved against the prophet, not even the priestess. She only wept and said, I don't remember what we were protecting anymore. Chapter 3. Sickness came, but not of the body. Dreams twisted. People saw the gate in their sleep, but open, and beyond it, not monsters, but truths. Old ones, abandoned kin, forgotten joys. Some woke crying, others screaming. The prophet stayed by the gate, silent now, waiting. One morning, the boy Orrin returned from the woods with a scroll of vine etched in living script. It told the story of the village founding not as protectors, but exiles. The gate had been built to forget their past, not to seal it. We were the cursed, he read aloud, not cursed by evil, but by fear of our own mistakes. That night, the gate opened. No wind, no roar, just a sigh as if exhaling after centuries of silence. No one crossed, not yet, but the vines around it bloomed. The prophet stood and turned. What you fear to lose, he said, reveals what you've made sacred. And with that, he walked into the night, the laughter of the gate trailing behind him like music. The villagers never closed it again. Title: The Breath That Burns. Year: 294,871,794.8 Era. Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the soot-choked city of Mirat, where the sky wept ash and lungs bore the weight of unspoken grief, survival was a kind of prayer, not to gods, but to breathe itself. The ash-lunged prophet moved through its streets like a rumor. His voice was broken flint, his steps measured by the rhythm of remembered names. People spoke of him not in awe, but in need. Whispers passed between crumbling walls and under curfews made of silence. Each morning he walked to the flame tower at the city's center, a structure once used a signal piece across the horizon, now repurposed as a warning. Fires burned not to guide, but to punish. One day, at the base of the tower, he found a child. She sat alone, her hair streaked with cinder, her eyes like kindling. "They call me the Flame Prophet," she said, unblinking, "but I don't know what to burn." The ash-lunged prophet knelt beside her. "Then burn nothing. Listen first." She frowned. "Everyone says I was born to destroy." "No," he said. "You were born to transform." He placed her hand on his chest. Let her feel the rasp of each breath. You are the echo of 1,000 prayers answered in breath. Above them, the tower pulsed with heat. The flames had heard. Chapter 2. The flame prophet walked beside the ash-lunged one now, their path traced through smoldering alleys and beneath the collapsed arcades of memory. People began to follow, first in silence, then in questions. "What are we to do? Where can we go? Who leads when the light is only smoke?" The ash-lunged prophet answered with stories, short ones, carved and set on broken walls, parables of those who changed by choice rather than force. In one, a baker hid dissent in loaves of bread, feeding not revolution, but truth. In another, a child stopped a riot by singing a lullaby only her mother remembered. These were not acts of fire, but of heat slowly rising. The flame prophet watched, learned, and waited. Their greatest challenge came at the breath tribunal at dawn, once sacred, now desecrated by decrees written in toxin. Inside, the council of masked figures pronounced who was fit to live, based on breath quotas. The ash-lunged prophet stood in their circle. He removed his mask, coughed once, then twice, then spoke. "Breath is not a privilege. It is prophecy." The flame prophet lit no fire. She simply inhaled and exhaled light. The dome cracked. Chapter 3. The city awoke to fire, but not destruction. Transformation. Forges reignited, not to craft weapons, but tools. The ash that once suffocated now seeded gardens. The people, once afraid to speak, began to write poems in the dust on each other's windows. The ash-lunged prophet, weakened, sat atop the ruined flame tower. The child, no longer merely the flame prophet, brought him a bowl of steam-laced roots. "They're saying we started a new age," she said. He smiled, faint and wide. "You just remembered what age we were always meant for." She looked out over the city. It still coughed, still trembled, but it lived, and in its breath she heard it. "Hope. You're not dying." "Are you?" she asked. He laughed softly. "We're all dying, but some of us are burning first so others can breathe." She knelt, touched his chest once more. It was slower now, but steady. In the distance, the tower's flames dimmed, not out of weakness, but peace. And across Merak, people gathered not to protest, not to worship, but to breathe together. And in that breath, they found a new language, one built not on laws, but on transformation. Title: The Cloak of Stillness. Year: 294,871,794.5 Era. Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the Vale of Stillness, where even the rivers dared not ripple, there lived a weaver named Leora who wore the Cloak of Stillness. It was a gift passed down through generations as soft, moon-gray shawl said to calm storms and silence grief. Leora never married, never left the Vale. Her life was gentle, undisturbed. Visitors came seeking comfort, and she gave it freely. But the price of stillness was solitude, and the world beyond the Vale spun faster with each passing season. Then came Aaron, a wanderer with shoes worn thin by choice, eyes too curious to be silent. He arrived not in need, but in reverence, having heard of Leora's gift and wishing to see if it was real. She let him stay. Her quiet did not scare him. Every night Aaron would ask her a question, at the world, about her heart. about the cloak. And every night she answered one less question, until one night she answered none, because she had dreamed of ghosts. Her own. Chapter 2. The ghosts did not speak in moans, but in moments. Her sister's laugh, long buried. Her mother's warning about never standing still too long. Her first love, who had left and never returned. They haunted not with terror, but with memory. Aaron noticed the change. He walked the vale in circles, muttering poetry to the wind as if to coax the silence into music. Finally, he sat beside Leora and asked, "When did you stop moving?" "I never started," she replied. They spent the next week in motion planting, painting, dancing beneath willow light. And each night, Leora saw fewer ghosts, but the cloak grew heavier. On the 7th night, Aaron tried to take it from her shoulders. "No," she said, gripping it. "It's all I have. It's all you've hidden in." That night, Leora wept, not from sorrow, but from thaw. And the voice of the moon's shadow whispered in her dreams, "Movement is mourning in disguise. Let it lead you." Chapter 3. Leora left the vale. She did not burn her home. She left it open, the cloak folded neatly on the table. She walked beside Aaron through forests that bent toward conversation, through cities that forgot how to stop moving. They told no one who they were. They simply listened. In a village clinging to old rules, they taught children how to paint with sound. In a seaside town drowning in noise, they showed lovers how to speak with silence. But the world was changing faster now. Empires breaking, skies dimming. One night, while camping near a broken statue of an ancient king, Leora turned to Aaron. "If I stop," she said, "will the ghosts return?" "They might," he replied, "but this time they'll sit beside us instead of behind." And so she stopped, and they came, ghosts of a still life unlived. They wrought no fear, only stories. When you finally stop, your ghosts arrive to teach. Leora listened, and in the listening, she learned how to love forward. Title: The Wounded Saint. Year: 294,230,768.8. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In a village forgotten by maps but remembered by scars, a boy named Jalen carried water, not as punishment, nor as duty, but as penance. Each morning, before the first crow called, he traced the path from the broken well to every doorstep. He was not born a villain, but once he had struck a match for laughter and lost a barn to flames. The elders did not exile him. They gave him a task. "You cannot unburn the barn," they said, "but you can keep another from falling." And so he carried water. One day, a traveler limped into the village. Her robes bore ash stains and her voice trembled with exhaustion. She called herself the Wounded Saint, and though no one recognized her, the way she knelt before each fire spoke of reverence older than faith. She noticed Jalen. "You carry water like a warrior carries a blade," she said. "I'm just trying to make things right." She nodded. "Then you're already stronger than most." Chapter 2. The Wounded Saint did not preach. She listened. She sat with the mothers, the workers, even the thieves, and from them she collected not coins but confessions. "You know what makes a saint?" she asked Jalen one evening. He shrugged. "Someone who doesn't wait to be told they were wrong. Just someone who does what needs to be done." Word came of a landslide upriver. A nearby village buried. No call for help had reached them, only silence. The elders hesitated, but Jalen did not. He filled every jar he could carry and began to climb. The Wounded Saint followed, not leading, but watching. What they found was worse than rumor. Houses broken like reds. Children digging with bare hands. Jalen did not panic. He handed out water. He cleared rubble. He found a girl clutching a doll, too shocked to cry. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're here now." And in that moment, he became more than forgiven. He became needed. Chapter 3. They stayed for weeks. The saint taught villagers how to rebuild with what had not been buried. Jalen taught them how to carry what hurt without letting it rot. Each night, fires told stories not of loss, but of return. When the time came to leave, the villagers begged them to stay, but both knew their place was not there, not anymore. As they walked back, the saint touched Jalen's shoulder. "You've walked through fire, not away from it." He nodded. "Someone had to." At the edge of the village, the bone break bride waited. She was a legend, a shadow on the wind, but today she was flesh. She approached Jalen and placed a hand over his chest. "You've taken responsibility, not because it was demanded, but because it was right. He'll go far." Then she vanished. Jalen said nothing, just picked up the jars again. The heroes you never see are the ones saving the world by simply doing what's right. And he had water to carry. Title: The Flame That Hid Its Name. Year: 293,589,743.5. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the soot-veiled undercity of Varake, where Lal wore a different face by nightfall, Truth did not echo, it whispered. The streets curved like secrets, and every lamplight was a bargain. Here, the shadow whisperer was a myth mothers used to hush restless children, a thief with no past, a voice with no echo, but to those who survived off memory and stole time. She was more than myth, she was warning and wish alike. One evening, while escaping a crooked constable's snare, she ducked into the broken husk of an old smelt house. There, flickering in the dark like guilt-made flame, stood a figure wrapped in red and silence. "I know who you are," the flame said, "and who you are not." The whisper reached for her blade. "Relax," said the figure. "I'm not here for your blood. I'm here because you've forgotten your fire." They called him the outcast flame, once heir to a dynasty, now a fugitive prophet who spoke only in heat and consequence. He handed her a folded map. "Every path you ran from leads here." She opened it. Each street was marked by a scar she'd once earned, each corner an old betrayal. He whispered, "True strength is not forged in calm, but in the winds you dare to face." And the old furnace behind them roared back to life. Chapter 2. The whisper didn't believe in redemption. She believed in survival. Yet, the outcast flame followed her now, not as shadow, but conscience. Together they returned to the 7 districts of Barkay, each one ruled by a crime lord she had once served, betrayed, or outwitted. The first was Grelis the mason, who laid traps as easily as he laid bricks. They entered his tower through a forgotten aqueduct, lit only by soul and starlight. "You've got nerve returning here," Grelis spat. "What do you want?" "To confess," the whisperer said. He laughed until she placed on the table the stolen ledgers that could ruin every deal he'd ever made. "I've learned my limits," she said, "and I've learned I'm not the monster you tried to make me." Then she lit the ledgers on fire. Grelis didn't stop her. Next came part of the coil, a woman who traded information like venom in her lair of tapestries and truths. The whisperer gave up every lie she'd ever told to save herself. "I am not unbreakable," she admitted. "But you're still standing," Bart said, and let her pass. Each confrontation stripped her, not of power, but of illusion. Each step became a step back toward the name she had buried. Chapter 3. Their final stop was the Hall of Silence, where Barakay's founding crimes were etched in bone beneath the floor. No one walked there unless they had something left to lose. The outcast flame waited outside. "This is yours alone," he said. Inside, the whisperer faced herself. Literally, a mirror polished from obsidian and theft showed her all the lives she'd stolen from others and from herself. She knelt, not to repent, to acknowledge. "I am not invincible," she said aloud. "I am not whole, but I am still the fire they failed to put out." And the mirror cracked, not for force but truth. The outcast flame helped her out of the hall, and together they lit the pyre atop the central spire. A signal, not of surrender, not of defiance, but of return. The city watched. Some scoffed, others wept, and just a few began to whisper again. But this time, not in fear, in hope. The shadow whisper, reborn in her own truth, vanished into the wind, not to hide, but to guide. Title: What Illusion Takes. Year: 293,589,743. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Hand of Renewal. Cloaked in irreverent rogues stitched from tabloid headlines, paced the edge of the platform with a manic grin. Around her, the crowd roared not in unity, but in conflict. Afteared, that meant progress. She spoke in slogans. Truth is a luxury lie told by those who can afford to forget. Each phrase was another scalpel into society's bloated belly. She wasn't there to heal, not directly. She was there to expose. Her mission, to stretch the boundaries of the acceptable until hypocrisy tore itself apart. Somewhere in the back stood the light-bearer, a figure of quiet intensity, whose eyes were like searchlights cutting through fog. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it struck marrow. He watched her not with suspicion, but with the gaze of someone who recognized an equal wielding a different weapon. That day's topic: boundaries, not the ones marked by fences or court orders, but the invisible kind, emotional, spiritual, rhetorical. The boundaries violated every time someone laughed at a truth too raw to digest. "I will not whisper to keep you comfortable," she spat, circling a hologram of a politician caught in scandal. "I will scream so the lies have no place to hide." And when the crowd began to fracture, shouting over each other, that's when she smiled the hardest. Chapter 2. It was the aftermath that mattered. The light-bearer found her backstage, her chest still heaving, sweat dripping from her fingers like ink. "You don't pull punches," he said simply. "Wouldn't know how," she replied, cracking her knuckles. "But maybe you do, and maybe we need both." That night, they walked through the heart of the city, a district caked in neon grime and moral ambiguity. Billboards mocked the poor with promises they could never cash. Children raised themselves on screens that screamed "B.O. Why" louder than breathe. The light-bearer paused before one such screen, watching a loop of a happy family that didn't exist. "You think if we shout long enough, they'll hear us?" he asked. "No," she replied, "but they'll hear themselves. That's louder." Later, in a sanctuary beneath the bones of a collapsed shopping mall, they sat with others like them, satirists, dissenters, artists, and radicals. Each one carried a scar where society had tried to brand them into silence. "Set the terms," the light-bearer said, "not just the fight. The line between mockery and malice." And for once, the hand didn't answer with a quip, just a nod. Chapter 3. A broadcast. This time, not a shout, but a story. They wove satire with truth, skits with wounds, puppet show that ended in poetry, a comedy sketch that left the audience crying. The hand of Renewal dawned, a mask made of old newspaper clippings. She danced with shadows that whispered public secrets. The light-bearer played piano in the background, each note a reminder that honesty wasn't always beautiful, but it was always needed. It spread like a virus. Not the story, but the shift. People stopped laughing out of habit. They listened. They questioned. Some grew angry, not at the show, but at themselves. Boundaries were set that night, not by force, but by realization. And when it was done, and the lights dimmed, the hand leaned toward the light-bearer and whispered, "What illusion takes, sovereignty replaces." And he smiled. "Then let's teach them to reclaim it." Title: The Ashes Beneath Silence. Year: 292,948,717.4. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the crumbled remains of a city no longer named, the keeper of forgotten rites roamed. She was neither young nor old. Her body, a living parchment inscribed with memory and loss. The forgotten librarian waited in the broken atrium, amidst hollowed tomes whose pages crumbled into ash at her touch. Outside, the sky swam in copper storms. Their mission was clear: one must be buried so the other may rise. But even in sacrifice, there are secrets unwilling to die. Chapter 2. The wind carried voices that did not belong to the living, through shattered archives of the primordial keep. Echoes of choices long buried pulled the librarian deeper into revelation. An ancient ritual, the rite of 7 vows, waited to be completed. The keeper had once sworn never to speak it. Yet now, silence no longer protected. The ritual demanded a bond not of blood, but of understanding. Together they descended into the tomb where time itself had forgotten its purpose. Chapter 3. Candles burned blue around the final circle, flames licking at reality's fabric. The forgotten librarian, eyes veiled in tears she would not name, held the heart thread of her companion. The keeper knelt, prepared to be unmade to save what remained. In that sacred stillness, memory unraveled. From sorrow came clarity, from sacrifice renewal. They emerged not as what they were, but what was needed. The lore-bound flame, and the one who bore it into the world's next turning. Title: The Rite of Depth. Year: 292,307,692.2. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. Beneath the veils of the evermorn peaks, where mist-swept stories and rivers remembered names the sky had long forgotten, a caravan stopped without reason. The wind had shifted, the ground had whispered, and the soul weaver felt it in her spine. She stood at the front, her hands bound in ceremonial wrappings dyed with sorrow's dye colors made from the crushed petals of memory. Bloom, her voice when used, stitched ruptured spirits together. But today she was silent. Beside her rode the veiled seer, cloaked in gauze that shimmered with the dust of unreconciled dreams. No one had seen her face. No one dared ask. "We are near the crossing," the seer said, "where grief is not your grave, it is your rite of depth." The soul weaver nodded. From behind them, murmurs rose among the caravan, leaders from fractured tribes, exiles from lost cities, refugees of fading truths. They all looked to the soul weaver not as ruler, but as tether. A rift had torn through their old world. Now they journeyed not toward conquest, but cohesion. The seer raised a hand. "Across, you must tell the truth." The soul weaver stepped forward. Her first word in days broke like light through fog. "I grieve the mask I wore to lead you." And the crossing opened. Chapter 2. The path led through the valley of the remembered, a place where every stone bore a name, and every name carried a burden. The walk here was to tread upon regrets sanctified by time. The caravan grew quiet. The soul weaver paused before a boulder carved with her brother's name. He had died in a rebellion she had quelled by choosing silence over confrontation. The veiled seer watched. "You need not explain," she said. "I must," the weaver replied, "not for penance, for unity." That night she spoke beside the central fire. "I let fear speak from me. I led by appearances. I spun harmony without substance. And I forgot that grief, like love, binds best when not hidden." She expected judgment. Instead, a warrior from the iron south stood. "And let us lay it in the open. even if our voices crack. One by one, others joined, sharing not victories, but fractures. The fire became not a center of command, but of communion. The seer whispered to the wind. So begins a spiral upward, and for the first time in weeks, the stars showed themselves. Chapter 3. At the edge of the valley stood a ruined temple older than any story still told. Its spires pointed downward, as if bowing to something buried. This was the cradle of the first lie. Here the soul weaver would be tested. Inside, mirrors formed the maze. Each reflection showed a different version of herself: tyrant, martyr, coward, saint. She walked slowly, naming each aloud. I was afraid. I was proud. I was alone. I wanted to be loved, not followed. With each truth, a mirror shattered not from force, but release. At the maze, heart stood a little, not of thread, but of breath, memory and pain. The soul weaver placed her hand upon it. From the shadows stepped the veiled seer. Will you weave from what is broken? Yes, the weaver said, because that is where the faith lives. Together, they crafted the tapestry of becoming, a banner, not of victory, but of witness. When they emerged, the caravan knelt not in worship, but alignment. The soul weaver raised the banner high, and for the first time, no one followed out of fear. They walked beside her, because her grief was no longer her grave. It was her right of depth, title, the weight of forgotten judgments. Year 292,307,691.7. Era, primordial pulse. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the fractured remnants of a world governed by tides of memory. 2. The enforcers of cosmic law walk among the whispers of injustice. The keeper of cosmic law, known only as Keto, emerges from the hollow bones of the last lunar tribunal, his obsidian robes flickering with symbols from forgotten languages. At his side drifts the weaver of moons, an ethereal woman born in starlight and shadow, her long fingers forever weaving invisible strands between fates. Their destination, an ancient enclave beneath the oceanic vaults of Echo Basin, where entire cities once thrived in crystalline clarity, but are now drowned in the brine of betrayal. A tribunal has been summoned not by authority, but by anomaly. Records suggest someone or something has manipulated the karmic weights inscribed into the Zodiac ledger. The enclave, a derelict archive submerged in gravitational tides, responds only to bloodlines tied to the original Zodiac accord. Ghidrol's blood unlocks the sealed hall. Within, they find hundreds of skeletal remains, each clutching sigils of absolution that had never been granted. The crime, a systemic erasure of entire communities deemed imbalanced by prejudiced algorithms encoded centuries before. The weaver listens to the silence. She does not cry, but her stitching tightens. We cannot undo what has passed, Keto whispers, but we can cast judgment on what persists. He takes the sigils and burns them in a black flame, binding their truth into the sky. Chapter 2. The scent of cosmic fire still lingers as the duo ascends to the ruined surface, where survivors wander in cloaked despair. Above them hangs a new constellation, a silent verdict etched in flame. Yet not all bear witness with humility. The wardens of order, bureaucrats from the Polaris hegemony, challenge Keto's authority. You act alone, they sneer. Your station was revoked in the 20th cycle. I am not bound by revocation. Keto responds, I am bound by justice. An insurrection brews. The survivors, descendants of the erased, rally behind Keto and the Weaver. They build lanterns from moonstone and light them with stories once forbidden. These lanterns float skyward, turning the very constellations into testimony. The Weaver sings to them in a dialect that predates language, each word a thread weaving collective memory into permanence. As the revolt grows, the wardens deploy mnemonic silos, machines that rewrite consciousness through harmonic pulse. Keto is struck. His memories fracture, scatter across realms, echoing in the minds of every survivor like prayers. But before collapse, he seals his intent into the ledger, binding it to the next tribunal. The Weaver vanishes, or so it seems. Chapter 3. It is years later, and the world breathes again. The enclave has become a sanctuary. New Zodiac guardians emerge, not warriors, but scholars, musicians, and healers. The ledger has changed. It now hums with inclusivity, written by 1,000 hands instead of one. A child named Luna, born under Cancer's gentle arc, finds the last thread Keto once held. Guided by dreams of an old man wrapped in night and a woman with moons in her hair, she descends into the enclave's heart. There, she finds a single strand of Keto's memory embedded in crystal. It speaks. Behind every triumph lurks the shadow of what it cost to get there. She weeps not from grief, but understanding. And in that moment, the Weaver reappears, ageless and quiet. You have remembered enough, he says. Now, let us write anew. They do not rebuild the tribunal. They build a garden, and above them, the stars rearrange themselves into something never seen before, a reminder, an invitation, a warning. The age of forgetting has ended.